this to my house.
Your father. He says the debt must be settled tonight.
I am not a debt. I am his daughter.
The Kola nuts say otherwise.
There was a village called Inewi-Agu, sitting at the edge of a red earth forest, where the Iroko trees grew so tall they scraped the belly of the sky. And in that village lived a girl named Adaeze. Adaeze was not the richest girl in Inewi-Agu. She did not have the finest wrapper or the most elaborate coral beads, but she had something that money could not stitch together. She had a laugh that made even grieving women look up from their sorrow. When Adaeze laughed, it was the sound of the first rain after a long dry season. It was the sound of children running. It was the sound of life deciding to continue. Her mother had died when she was 7, leaving behind only a wooden comb, a half-finished song, and a daughter who smiled too wide for the world to ignore. Her father, Ichie Obiora, was a man who loved palm wine more than he loved consequence. He was respected in the village because his father had been great, but Ichie Obiora himself had spent 20 years quietly dismantling everything that greatness had built. Adaeze knew her father's flaws the way you know a crack in a wall you have lived beside all your life. She knew, and she still loved him. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was smiling the morning Okonkwo came to their compound. Okonkwo was not from Inewi-Agu. He was from the bigger town of Onitsha, where men wore wealth like a second skin. He was 51 years old. He had buried 2 wives, the first from fever, the second from silence. The women said the second wife did not die from any sickness. They said she simply stopped wanting to live. He came to Inewi-Agu for trade. He left wanting Adaeze. She was 23. She was drawing water from the community well when he first saw her. She had been laughing at something her friend Ngozi said, her head thrown back, her whole body alive with it. Okonkwo stood at the edge of the road and watched her the way a man watches something he has already decided to own. He went to Ichie Obiora that same evening. The bride price he offered was a bag of golden kola nuts, 48 of them, each one fat and perfectly formed, wrapped in fresh leaves and tied with red thread. In their tradition, kola nuts were sacred. They were given to elders. They were broken at ceremonies. They were the language of respect and covenant. But 48 golden kola nuts was an obscene amount. It was a number designed to make a father forget that his daughter was a person. Ichie Obiora forgot. He did not ask Adaeze. He did not call her inside and sit with her and say, "My daughter, a man has come." He simply sent word to Okonkwo that the compound was open. Adaeze found out the same night Okonkwo's men dropped the bag at her door. She begged her father with everything she had. She knelt on the cold floor of his room. She held his hands. She told him she was not ready. She told him that she had heard the stories about Okonkwo's second wife. She told him that her laughter would die in that man's house. Ichie Obiora looked at his daughter and said, "Your laughter cannot pay my debts." She stopped speaking after that, not because she had nothing left to say, but because she understood for the first time that some doors close from the inside, and her father had already locked his. She married Okonkwo on a Thursday. The ceremony was brief. There was food and music, and people who smiled without knowing what they were celebrating. Adaeze wore her mother's coral beads. She did not laugh once. Not once.
Ngozi, her closest friend, held her hand behind the kitchen after the ceremony and whispered, "You will be okay." Adaeze looked at her and said nothing. She had already started disappearing. Okonkwo's house in Onitsha was large and cold, the way only rich houses can be cold. There were curtains that were never opened, chairs that were never sat in, rooms that existed only to prove that rooms existed. Okonkwo did not beat her. That is the thing people never understood when Adaeze tried in later years to explain what happened to her inside that house. He did not raise his hand. He did not shout. What he did was quieter and more complete than any of that. He ignored her joy. Every time she laughed at something on the radio, at a neighbor's child, at a story Ngozi told during a visit, Okonkwo would look at her with an expression that was not quite disgust and not quite boredom, but somewhere in between. A look that said, "Why are you doing that?" A look that asked, "Who gave you permission to be that alive?" Within 8 months, Adaeze had stopped laughing completely. She moved through the house like a woman learning to take up less space. She cooked, she cleaned, she sat in the room with the curtains that were never opened, and she stared at the wall and tried to remember what her mother's voice had sounded like. She could not remember. That frightened her more than anything. Then she found out she was pregnant. She told Okonkwo expecting something, warmth, relief, even simple acknowledgement. Okonkwo looked at her stomach the way he looked at a new piece of furniture he had ordered and was not sure he liked. "Make sure you eat well," he said. Then he left the room. It was Ngozi who came from Niwiagu to stay with her during the pregnancy. And it was Ngozi who, sitting with her one night in the kitchen over a pot of ofe onugbu, said quietly, "Adaeze, I need to tell you something about your father." The debt Ichie Obiora was drowning in, the one that Okonkwo's bride price had supposedly cleared, it wasn't a real debt. It had been a transaction. Okonkwo had been searching for a young wife for 2 years. He had heard about Adaeze specifically, her spirit, her laugh, her youth. He had approached Ichie Obiora not as a suitor, but as a buyer. And Ichie Obiora, who owed a man in Onitsha a sum he could not pay, had agreed to the exchange before Okonkwo ever set foot in Niwiagu. The Kola nuts were not bride price, they were payment. Adaeze sat very still for a long time after Ngozi finished. The soup was boiling. The night outside was loud with crickets. Her hands were folded in her lap over her swollen stomach. Then she made a decision so quietly it did not even disturb the air. She did not scream. She did not confront Okonkwo. She did not call her father and pour out her grief over the telephone. She understood now that grief poured into the wrong vessels only drowned you faster. Instead, she began to plan. She had a son. She named him Chukwuemeka. God has done great things. She held him the first night, and something that had been sealed inside her for almost 2 years cracked open slowly, like a seed pushing through hard ground. Not her laughter, not yet, but the memory of it, the knowledge that it still existed somewhere inside her, waiting. She began to teach herself. During Okonkwo's long trips to Lagos for business, she read. She asked questions of the traders she met at the market. She found a woman named Mrs. Adaeze, who ran a small fabric business from her parlor in Onitsha GRA, and she offered to help with record keeping in exchange for learning everything Mrs. Adaeze knew. Mrs. Adaeze, who had survived her own long winter, looked at this young woman with the quiet eyes and taught her everything. 3 years passed. Adaeze learned the language of commerce the way she had once learned the language of joy, completely, naturally, as though it had always been inside her, waiting to be spoken. Okonkwo's business began to collapse in the 4th year of their marriage. The details were complicated. A bad investment, a partner who vanished, a government contract that dissolved overnight. What was not complicated was the result. The large cold house began to empty. The curtains that were never opened stayed closed now because the windows to find them had been seized. Okonkwo, who had never once asked Adaeze what she was thinking, now needed her to think for both of them. She was calm when he came to her. She was sitting in the kitchen feeding Chukwuemeka, and she looked at her husband, this man who had bought her like furniture, who had watched her laughter die and felt nothing, and she felt no anger. That surprised her. She had expected anger. What she felt instead was something colder and more final. Clarity. She told him she had savings, small, she said, from careful housekeeping over the years. She told him she had a contact, Mrs. Adaeze, who might be able to help him find his footing again. She said all of this gently, and Okonkwo, who was desperate, was grateful in the way that men who never respected someone become grateful when they need them. What Okonkwo did not know, what he would not discover for another 6 months, was that the fabric business Adaeze had been quietly building under Mrs. Eze's name was already turning a profit that exceeded anything his own business had managed in its best year. She left on a Tuesday, not dramatically, not with a confrontation designed to wound. She packed Chukwuemeka's things first, then her own. She took her mother's coral beads. She left everything Okonkwo had given her, every wrapper, every piece of jewelry, every object that carried the weight of what she had been purchased for. She left a letter. It was short. It said, "I came into your house with laughter. You did not want it. I am taking it back." She moved to Enugu, where she registered her business in her own name. Within a year, Adaeze Fabrics had 3 staff members and a client list that stretched from Enugu to Abuja. Within 2 years, she had opened a second branch in Lekki. Within 3, she was the woman that younger women came to when they needed to learn how to survive their own long winters. And Chukwuemeka, her son, her seed, her reason, grew up watching her mother laugh, loudly, fully, without permission from anyone. As for Ichi Obiora, her father, she visited him once. He was older, smaller. The palm wine had taken more from him than he had taken from her, and the sight of him no longer made her chest tight. She sat with him. She brought him food. She did not mention the Kola nuts. She did not need to. The look in his eyes when she stood to leave, the look of a man who understood exactly what he had thrown away, that was consequence enough. As for Okonkwo, the house was sold. The curtains finally came down. He lived modestly in a single room in a compound in Onitsha and told anyone who asked that his wife had left him. He never said why. Some shames are too specific to share. But the people of Newiagu knew, and the people of Onitsha came to know. And eventually the story reached the places where young women were being handed over like debts, and some of them, hearing it, lifted their heads. On the day Chukwuemeka turned 7, Adaeze threw him a party in their compound in Enugu. There was jollof rice and chin-chin, and the cake shaked like a lion because he had asked for a lion, and she had decided that her son would always get what he asked for when it was in her power to give it. Ngozi was there. Mrs. Eze was there. Women Adaeze had mentored sat under a canopy in the afternoon light. And at some point, a child said something funny. Nobody could remember afterwards exactly what it was, and Adaeze laughed. It came out of her like the first rain after a long dry season, full, sudden, completely itself. Her son looked up at her with wide eyes, and then he laughed too, because children always follow the sound of their mother's joy even when they don't know why. And in that courtyard in Enugu, with the afternoon turning gold around her, Adaeze understood something she had known once and lost, and now held again. That her laughter had never truly left her. It had only been waiting for a life worthy of it.
Here is the question that will divide your comment section. Was Adaeze's father more guilty than Okonkwo? Or was Okonkwo the real villain? Drop your answer below. Let's debate this. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone you love who is still fighting, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Share it with one woman today who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below. Your words matter to us and to every person who reads them. God bless you, and we will see you in the next story.